I'm Liz Hirsch-Naftali, and welcome to the Capital Coffee Connection podcast. And on this podcast, I am speaking with diverse leaders about their hearts, their humanity, their home, and their hopes. And we are trying to transcend political divides and really just talk to real people about their titles, their jobs, and who they are. So today I'm super excited because I get to speak with Hakeem Jeffries, who's been the House Democratic leader since 2023. Hakeem is the first person of color to lead a major U.S. party in the Congress. And I know you're not the last, but you are the first. And so on that, I just want to say welcome and thank you for taking time to talk with me today.
Thank you, Liz. Great to be with you.
So, Hakeem, you are from New York's 8th Congressional District. Who do you represent there?
So it's New York's 8th Congressional District, which is anchored in Brooklyn, represent an incredibly diverse district, one of the most diverse in the nation. As a matter of fact, it historically has been the 9th most African-American district in the country and the 16th most Jewish. My good friend Leon Goldenberg tells me all the time, Hakeem, you got the best of both worlds. Mm-hmm. It's an incredibly diverse district, anchored in the African-American community and the Jewish community. And as a matter of fact, the entire spectrum of a gorgeous mosaic in the context of the Jewish community. That's the secular Jewish community, the Reform Jewish community, the conservative Jewish community, the Orthodox Jewish community, the modern Orthodox Jewish community, the ultra-Orthodox Jewish community. And one of the things that is incredibly important about this district is that because I represent the Coney Island Peninsula and the neighborhood of Brighton Beach,
right,
I actually serve more Russian-speaking Jewish immigrants from the former Soviet Union than any other member of Congress in the country. I mean, this is an only in America situation, and it's the beauty of the 8th Congressional District.
And I'll just add that my son lives in your district too, so that even makes it more beautiful. And just because I think sometimes people don't understand, what is the leader? How did you become the leader? I think it's important for people to understand how things work, and sometimes people are scared to go, what does it really mean?
So, in the Congress, as we are loosely organized, Democrats on one side of the aisle, Republicans on the other side of the aisle, but all Americans, here to serve the people that we're privileged to represent. But in the context of that bipartisan dynamic with Republicans and Democrats, on the Democratic side, when we're in the majority, the top Democrat in the Congress is the Speaker. And then there is Democratic Majority Leader, the Democratic Whip, that's 2 and 3, the Democratic Chair, which would be 4, Chair of the House Democratic Caucus, and then the Democratic Vice Chair. That's sort of how Democrats organize themselves. Republican situation is pretty similar. When we're in the minority, which is the case right now, of course, the Speaker who holds the gavel is on the other side of the aisle. So then the top Democratic leader in the structure is known as the minority leader or the House Democratic leader. And so I have the honor of holding that position now, having succeeded a legendary leader, Speaker Nancy D'Alessandro Pelosi, when she decided to step out of the leadership after 20 years of, just iconic, heroic representation and leadership on behalf of the American people, sometimes as leader, sometimes as speaker, and now to stand on her broad shoulders, along with some of the other new House Democratic leaders, Catherine Clark and Pete Aguilar and Ted Lieu, all of whom you know very well.
It's an interesting piece, and I think it's for people to get to understand how the system works. So thank you. And one of the other things before we dive into your beginnings that I just wanted to share is that, one of the things that I have seen over the last 8 months is that Republicans and Democrats do work together. Sometimes we just hear in the press only the disasters, but there's a lot of work that does get done. But one of the things that I wanted just to talk about for a minute was that, on October 7th, when my great niece, Abigail, was taken as a hostage by Hamas terrorists to Gaza, I found myself on the Hill here pretty much a week and a half after. And I met you. And I also met Congressman Steve Scalise, 2 very different leaders. But one of the things, and then many others, and I was here in a position of needing so much help to get Abigail free and 240 hostages free. And more and more people started to come. But one of the things that has been consistent is that Democrats and Republicans have been together, united for these hostages. And we saw at the State of the Union when President Biden spoke, the Republicans joined the Democrats in rising 2 times, one for John Lewis, and the second when he talked about the hostages. And I just say, as an American and having been put in this position, that I celebrate in the midst of all this tragedy and this horror and that we're still living with, that both the Republican side and the Democratic side have come together. So I just wanted to say thank you, because I know that that's part of leadership on both sides to make that happen.
That's been incredibly important. And your leadership in that regard, has been so meaningful, so authentic, so heartfelt at a very searing moment for you, your family, Abigail, and of course, the hostage families in Israel, in America, and every person of decency and goodwill, regardless of what their ideological perspective is on a wide variety of issues, both domestic and national security, should, from the standpoint of humanity, recognize the trauma that has been inflicted on the hostages and their families, and for that matter, the Israeli people, and work in a bipartisan way to stand with the families, make it clear that we stand with the hostages and are prepared to do everything possible to bring them home.
And I'll just add to that, one of the messages that I have been, as a hostage family member, and Abigail and 109 women and children were released at the end of November 2023 in a week. And one of the things that I have always talked about, going back to that humanity, is that, yes, you need to release these hostages. They are innocent people that were kidnapped and stolen. You need to find a way to stop the fighting. And we need to help the people, the Palestinians who are living in Gaza. And I think that that's my personal message. But I think it goes back to, we need to take care of each other as people. And that's, part of the reason why I started this podcast before everything was to really talk about the heart and humanity, because I realize and recognize in our leaders, there's a lot of heart and humanity, but it doesn't always get past the 2 minutes you get on a news show.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think there, should be some core principles that bring us together. Hamas clearly has to be decisively defeated. That's a core principle. The hostages must be returned. That's a core principle. They've been kidnapped and held in horrific conditions for months.
Yeah.
Torn away from their families in the most horrific of circumstances. And we also must surge humanitarian assistance into Gaza so we can be there for Palestinian civilians who are in harm's way in a theater of war through no fault of their own. And we can find the space to recognize that these are some core principles that we can all lean into and then build from there to get to a place where we can find a path forward. And I'm thankful for the leadership of President Biden toward a just and lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinian people.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I think it's an important conversation. And I usually don't go down that, but I know that you were one of the first people that I did come with a group to meet with. So thank you. Having talked about that, the family, because again, this is about family, what we've been discussing. You have an interesting family and you come from Brooklyn, so you never left.
That's right.
Could you talk a little bit about growing up in Brooklyn, about your parents and what they did and what they gave to you as a young person that got you here today?
Yeah. I grew up in central Brooklyn, Crown Heights, working class neighborhood, grew up in a union household. Both of my parents were public employees throughout their entire lives. My mom was a caseworker for the Human Resources Administration. My father was a substance abuse social worker who was in the community during some challenging times, which also include the heroin explosion of the 1970s and the crack cocaine epidemic of the mid 80s into the early 90s. So my younger brother and I grew up in that household. We were raised in the Cornerstone Baptist Church. We were both born in Brooklyn Hospital. And it's been an incredible journey. Those were very trying times in the neighborhood and in the community. The next day, the next week, the next month. And that type of neighborhood at that time was never entirely promised. But I'm thankful to family, to my parents, to the community, to, have been raised in a nurturing environment. And eventually, to make it to college and the grad school and the law school, start a career in the law, and then ultimately have an opportunity to be elected to the state assembly, where I served for 6 years.
Right.
And then about 12 years ago to the United States Congress.
And in that time, did you have a teacher or teachers that are still in your life, or said things or did things that got to you where you are? Because a lot of leaders have really specific memories of their teachers and their words and their influence.
Yeah, well, I think there were probably, 3 people who were pretty influential beyond my parents and my grandmother, who we affectionately refer to as Grandma Nano, who was wise, beyond her years, always took the time for my brother, for myself, to give her thoughts, her insight, her perspective on staying the course, how to grow up and be a responsible young person, a family-oriented person, someone who looks out for the community. So Nano, as we called her, Grandma Nano, was an incredibly important influence. Professionally, there were probably 3 people who were very important to me along my journey. One would certainly be Professor Randy Hertz, who was a professor of mine at NYU Law School in the Juvenile Rights Clinic, which I had the opportunity to participate in my 3rd year. One of the most popular professors at NYU Law School, very social justice oriented. And, he was just a wonderful figure throughout my law school journey and up until this very day. I grew up in the Cornerstone Baptist Church, as I mentioned, and I've had 3 different pastors throughout that period of time. But for 21 years during my most formative years, it was the Reverend Dr. Harry Starks Wright, who is a legendary Baptist preacher, but just such a fundamentally good man who always took out the time to, nurture and develop myself, my younger brother, and all the young people in the church. And thankfully, in his 90s, he's still with us, and
Wow.
had the opportunity to spend a little time with him last year. But he's been an incredibly important influence in my life. And then I practiced law, as you know, at the Paul Weiss, Rifkin, Morton and Garrison law firm, great law firm. I was in the litigation department, got a wonderful opportunity to learn the art and science of the law through some of the great litigators in the country and in the world. One of them is a pretty prominent attorney named Ted Wells, who has become an incredible mentor and supporter throughout my professional journey. So it's been a wonderful thing to have people who've taken an interest in me along the way. And I've tried to return that as I now find myself in a more seasoned stage of life.
Behind every great man or every great leader is even a better, greater partner. And so your wife, she has to put up with a lot because you're traveling a lot and you're taking care of so many other people. How does she balance and how do you balance? Because I know you have boys, they're growing up and they're grown up, but how do you make it all work and how does she support you? Because you get a lot of the credit for everything you're doing, but she's the person that is standing and supporting you.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that when someone serves in office or when you serve in Congress, we have a view that the entire family serves. The entire family sacrifices in that regard. Throughout the year, most of the weeks, we are gone. We leave home at the beginning of the week. We come to Washington to represent the people that we're privileged to serve. And we leave our families behind in those districts. And so we're thankful for our spouses, and in my case, my wife is a social worker. And so I come from a family of social workers. I'm not sure what happened to me, although part of what we try to do is bring the compassion of a social worker to our constituent service.
Yeah.
And so I've certainly learned that. But we're thankful for our families, for our spouses, for our partners, because it is a sacrifice, a wonderful honor to be able to be in the position to represent your constituents in the great tradition of the House of Representatives, anchored in this principle of representative government, but we're appreciative. And I think every opportunity that we have as members of Congress to articulate that appreciation is important. Many of us are preparing for the annual White House Congressional Picnic, where you'll see children here in the Congress and eventually at the White House I'm scheduled to talk to some of the families a little later on, and I'm going to make the point that we appreciate them giving us the ability to do the work that we do, and it could not be done without them.
Yeah, no, it's true. And you mentioned one other thing, which I think is also important for people to understand, is like your constituents. Like you are here in DC, but you spend a lot of time in your community, as do all the leaders. And that's a big part of it, is like helping the people. So when you talk about social work, while you're not a social worker, there's a huge social component, which is the relationships with your community.
Yeah, the key to the best social worker is compassion and understanding. And that's also key if you're going to be an effective representative member of Congress, particularly in the House, where we pride ourselves in being part of an institution that the framers viewed as the institution that would be the closest to the American people. And to reflect the hopes, the dreams, the aspirations, the fears, the concerns, the anxieties, or in the words of the framers, the passions of the American people. This is what the House was designed to be. It's the reason, as you know, Liz, that the House has 2-year terms as opposed to the presidency, 4-year term, the United States Senate, 6-year term.
Right.
Imagine that must be nice.
Yeah.
Or the Supreme Court, life tenure.
Yeah.
We're the institution that is designed to constantly be refreshed so that we stay close to the American people that we're privileged to represent. And that does require making sure that you're present on the ground to your question when you are back home, interacting with the people.
Yeah. We're going to go to my last part, which is rapid questions. You can answer rapidly or slowly, but just ways for people to get to know who you are.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, all that we've been talking about, it comes down to like, who are you also? What do you like or what don't you like? What is your favorite sound?
Sound of waves crashing in the ocean.
Yeah. Favorite color?
Blue.
Favorite smell?
Roses.
Who is your biggest cheerleader?
My mom.
What is your favorite ice cream flavor?
Vanilla.
If you had one meal that you could only have, what would it be?
I would say sea bass.
Okay.
With,
sounds good.
Some seasoned vegetables and a baked potato.
Very healthy, but also good.
Very healthy. Also some good flavor.
Yeah, I like it. A new question. What did you want to be when you grew up? Did you have something that you thought you were going to be?
I think when I was in high school, I had 2 aspirations. Point guard for the New York Knicks.
Yes.
Hip hop artist. Neither necessarily worked out. I did land in a pretty amazing place in the United States Congress, but I think like most kids growing up in Brooklyn, coming of age in the mid 80s, the early 90s, those were aspirations.
Yeah. Do you still have time to work out?
I have to lean in to working out. I'm not able to play as much basketball as I, had in my 20s or 30s or even into my early 40s. But I've, over the last several months, with intentionality, tried to carve out the space to be active, particularly with all of the anxiety and the intensity of the job.
Do you have music you listen to that just to disconnect?
That's very easy. 90s hip hop into early 2000s hip hop.
What's your favorite household chore?
Myself, as well as my sons, have been conferred the responsibility of making sure that the sink is always kept clean and tidy.
Okay, so that's may not be your favorite, but you have a job.
It's not my favorite, but it's the one that I better get done.
Yes, okay, good. And what is your superpower? What is Hakeem Jeffries' superpower?
Well, one of the things I've learned in this job, where we're faced with a series of unprecedented events, is that calm is an intentional decision. And that we can't change the fact that we're living in an unprecedented era of great challenge and crisis that hopefully we will work our way out of, and we have no option other than to work our way out of it. But when you're in it and there's this flood of intense events, that the only thing that you can control as a threshold matter is staying calm when the unprecedented events occur. And then in doing so, trying to arrive at a decision that's serious, sober, and substantive. But I've learned in this job in particular, over the last 18 months, that calm is an intentional decision.
Yeah, and an important one. Did anybody ever along the way give you some really good advice or really bad advice?
Well, one of the things that I've learned along the way is that, adversity is an important, necessary, inescapable part of life. And, something that I think I learned in high school when, I lost my subway pass, which high school students receive. Yeah. And in those days, if you lost your subway pass for the month, you couldn't get a replacement one. And I was terrified of having to tell my parents or Nano, my grandmother, what had happened. And it was a moment of adversity that I had to confront, be honest in confronting it. Somehow it worked out. I prayed and somehow showed up a day or two later. And along the way, I've realized that, confronting adversity is a necessary part of life.
Right.
And you are going to get knocked down, but that a knockdown is different than a knockout. You can get up off the ground. You can move forward. You can learn from whatever challenges that you've confronted and move forward to create a brighter day.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. And, it's interesting that that's something you still remember, that moment of losing that card. All these years later, with everything you've done,
yeah,
that still sticks up because you had to confront your parents and your grandmother.
That's right.
Pretty interesting. So this is my last question that I've asked everybody and I think the answers have been beautiful. What is your definition of joy? What brings you joy professionally, personally? And how, if you have joy as a person, a leader, do you share that joy with others?
I think sports in some ways is such, unifying arena and series of events for people to rally behind. And I raise that because, most recently, over the last several decades, it's not necessarily been joyful to be a Knicks fan. It's amazing to be a Knicks fan.
I got you.
But not joyful. But you're reminded of the joy of it, of being connected to a sports team, when every now and then, in the case of the New York Knicks, and we've seen the last few years, actually be filled with a lot more winning than has traditionally been the case in the previous 20 years. And their most recent season and their most recent playoff run was really joyful.
Yeah.
And it also creates some good hope and optimism in terms of what's to come in the next season. And it was a particularly compelling team that fought through a lot of adversity, that represented the resilience, of the city of New York. And the city really comes together when the Knicks are good.
Yes.
I mean, we love the Yankees. I love the Jets. The city really comes together. Every race, every religion, every ethnicity of all ages, and did that when the Knicks had their most recent run. And it really did give me a lot of joy.
Yeah. And it gave so many people a lot of joy. And it brought everyone together. It didn't matter where you came from, who you were, how you vote, what you do. You could come together. And I think that is one of the special moments. And you also do come together when they don't do as well, but it's a lot more joyful when they do well.
That's right.
Anyways, listen, I appreciate your time and I know you have a lot to do, but thank you. And really thank you for your authenticity, because at the end of the day, I really do know that you and many of your colleagues, both sides of the aisle, have hearts and humanity, but it's very rare that you have an opportunity in an interview, 30 minutes, not to have to sell something or tell what you voted on, but really just have a conversation as if we were sitting in your living room, but we're in your office and drinking coffee. So thank you for giving me this opportunity and for everybody to get to know really who Congressman Leader Hakeem Jeffries is. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the space to be able to do it. Thank you for your incredible partnership, friendship, and leadership.
Thank you. Hi, it's Liz. Please join me every Tuesday for coffee to talk about heart and humanity with our elected leaders. Remember to hit subscribe to get an alert when a new episode is live and for exclusive content. Ciao.